Now, why was it approved? I mean, why were they able to?
Well,
It was the standard.
the Port Authority has say over what they build. They're not responsible for any codes, and they developed the codes for this building when they were building the towers. So there's a lot of similarities in the buildings. The core had no lateral support, which is normal to have diagonals in the core. So all the core columns, if they were pushed out of alignment too far, they would collapse. The spans, I say, were too long. There were a lot of other things that I could mention, like the stairways were probably enclosed in sheetrock instead of hardened to protect it against any damage. There was a lot of deficiencies.
Now, you make an interesting point in your paper. We understand that Building 7 was impacted by large pieces of debris from the North Tower that created a 10-story gash in the south side. You made the point that the fires alone could have brought about the collapse of Building 7. So, in other words, you think that the debris itself was perhaps not the main problem here.
Well, that's my opinion from studying it. And, I mean, they have to do further tests on this. They have to do computer analyses, and they have to even maybe do some long-span floor testing, you know, some actual 60-foot long-span floors.
But that's what NIST. We should point out that there is going to be an official report that they're working on now and have been working on for a few years.
Due in the summer.
National Institute of Standards and Technologies. They had an interim report in June of 2004, but have learned a lot since then. And they don't even have in a couple of months they'll have their final hypothesis out. So when we're talking about what did happen to the building according to them, we're not quite sure yet what their final version is going to be. But they're saying that they're not really including the damage to the building as a main cause of collapse. They're just considering the fires, and they're just considering, which is fairly new information, they're just considering that it was not fed by the diesel oil, pressurized oil lines that were in the building, which was something that everyone had talked about quite a bit, that could have been a cause of why the fires were so severe. But they're saying that, well, the fires were basically normal office fires. And going under that assumption, the building still could have and did collapse.
Now, that's pretty much what you're saying.
Well, they also did some preliminary studies, and they found that if one column on the long span side of this building went out, the entire set of floors up to the roof would collapse. And that is definitely not according to city code, because the city code states that if one column is removed, the other columns have to take up the load. And I think it was the floors that sagged and pulled the column out of alignment.
Now, you described the penthouse. The east penthouse caves in and pulls the west penthouse along with it, creating that distinctive kink that we see in the photo.
It wasn't the east penthouse that pulled it. It was all the floors.
Well, I mean,
so
the floors
that happened from the bottom, near the bottom,
okay.
anyway. So it didn't. People see the first real visible sign of the collapse is the east penthouse, and we're talking about a huge structure, mechanical penthouse. This isn't where Larry Silverstein lived, as I've seen conspiracists say. Huge structure, the size of several apartment buildings on my block. And you see that descend into the roof line first. But what was happening is down below. The floors had given way, columns had lost their support and collapsed. So you can see this sort of rippling effect going up the building.
Now, you said it's started like on the 5th floor?
It could have started on the 12th floor or the 8th floor. I don't know which, but when all the floors lost the support of that column, or those columns, they're still attached together, the floors. Now, if they go down, they're pulling on the outside walls and the core columns, because they go into suspension. It's just like a cable in suspension. So pulling on the core columns, and that's what collapsed the core columns. And then you saw the west roof go in, the west penthouse go in, because the entire core failed. Once the core failed, everything goes down. The last thing to fall was the outside frame, which was probably pretty strong because it came down as a unit. It was collapsed by the time the outside frame.
That's a good point. One of the things that the conspiracists say is a sign of a controlled demolition is that the building fell pretty much straight down. I think we all agree that it did fall pretty straight down.
I was just going to ask you about that. I mean, it was all over Barclay Street, and it did heavy damage to 30 Washington.
A lot of that, yeah, it wasn't a neat pile, certainly. I mean, it destroyed a building that's being torn down right now, 30 West Broadway. But the start of the collapse, yes, it's pretty much vertical. But what's happening is the collapse starts in the interior, center interior of the building. It's a huge building. It's almost 100 meters on the north side, 186 feet in depth. And when you have a failure in the center of that, how else is the building going to collapse? People are saying that, oh, it should have been, because there was damage on the south side from the collapse of the North Tower, that it should have toppled over that way. Well, no. If the columns are all still in good shape, most of the columns are in good shape, the core columns are still in good shape, then it's not going to topple over. But if the failure happens where the core columns are, it's going to fall straight down.
Doesn't it irritate you to continue to read in 2008 that there were no significant fires and hardly any damage to the facade of the building? I mean, why would you be satisfied with that explanation when it's demonstrably untrue?
Right, there was a very serious fire on the 12th floor, I believe, and it covered practically half the building.
Yeah, you have photos.
Yeah, I mean, you can see fire out 8 windows on one side, on the east side of the building, and there was fire showing on the north side, out a couple of windows.
Now, when the fire department decides that the fire is too severe to warrant risking men's lives, what are we talking about? I mean, how bad a fire is that when they say we don't think we can handle this, we're just going to pull our men out?
They had a problem with water supply. If you don't have water, you can't put the fire out.
They didn't have pressure, didn't have water pressure.
Didn't have water pressure, so there was it was a fait accompli. They couldn't do anything.
So you have a building that's heavily damaged by debris, that has extremely severe fires raging, and you have no water to fight the fires, and people are wondering, why did this building fall down?
There's a really good comparison that conspiracists need to look into, and I cover this in my paper a little bit, which is between Building 7 and 90 West Street, which is just on the opposite side of the World Trade Center site. Was also hit by quite a bit of debris, had very severe fires in it, and burned for parts of 2 days. Now, why didn't that building collapse? Well, that building, a beautiful office building designed by Cass Gilbert, great architect, was built in 1907, I believe. Old style construction. Columns are close together, short span beams, but most importantly, the fireproofing that was attached to all that steel. Steel has to be fireproofed, or it's going to fail eventually in a fire, no matter how thick it is. Very thick cement and terracotta fireproofing. That's how they built them in those days. Expensive to build, takes up a lot of room. You don't have a lot of office space when you build like that. But very little structural damage to that building from the very severe fires that happened. So compare that to the spray-on fireproofing that was in Building 7. That doesn't take a blow very well. And you can see in some of the other buildings that didn't collapse, that were hit by debris, fireproofing is knocked right off of those beams. I was in Building 7 when they were constructing it, and I went to check to see how the fireproofing was. It's better than it used to be, because they're using fireproofing that's 5 times more durable than it's required by code. But the code, as Arthur I think will say in 1968 or so, did not require very substantial or very durable fireproofing.
Oh, Arthur, I think you're corroborating in your paper what Mark is saying. You talk about the great floor space in this building.
Yeah.
Is this a trade-off? More floor space, less safety?
Absolutely, because number one, they take the columns out because they want free floor space for the office workers. And they want views out the window for everybody in the office. So they take the walls out, the firewalls out. So in the old buildings, they had a limit to the size of an area that was enclosed by firewalls. In these buildings, they were some of the floors were completely open.